For the pineal gland, this is a pineal gland in the area of the brain called epithalamus, if you remember this from AB1. So this is around around the thalamus. A main hormone coming from there is melatonin. Melatonin is coming from a very similar structure to serotonin. If you're familiar with this serotonin, this is the happy hormone. So melatonin, what's happening is responsible for what we call the circadian rhythm or the sleep cycle. Okay, so melatonin, when it's produced, it will cause us to fall asleep. Melatonin is inhibited by light and promoted by darkness. Melatonin also would inhibit the gonadotropins from the anterior pituitary gland, the FSH and the LH, and therefore this will prevent the early puberty. One last thing I think it's important information to know that melatonin is inhibited by light and promoted by darkness. That's why for some people, if they are opening their phones at night or when they are in bed and in dark rooms, sometimes they will have difficulties in sleeping because melatonin is technically getting inhibited by the phone light. Then we have the pancreas. The pancreas is a special organ because it belongs to two organ systems. Pancreas has functions related to the digestive system because it produces digestive enzymes. This is something we'll talk about in the digestive system. We'll see some of those enzymes, but also it belongs to the endocrine system. Why? Because it produces two major hormones, insulin and glucagon, and those would regulate blood sugar. We'll see some details about them. Now, the digestive system part of the pancreas is exocrine glands, whereas the endocrine system part is endocrine glands. The endocrine glands are something we call the pancreatic islets. So those are group of cells. They are isolated. They are not connected to any duct, to any tunnel, and their secretion is secreted in the areas around them, and then it gets picked up by the blood. Okay, so those are the pancreatic islets. You'll see them under microscope. For the exocrine gland, there are other group of cells. Those cells that they will secrete their secretions, and those secretions will go to the pancreatic duct, and from there it goes to the small intestine. But again, that's something we will see in a digestive system. So we'll focus now only on the endocrine function of the pancreas. And here, as we said, we have two hormones, glucagon and insulin. So I'll go here. For the pancreas, we have insulin, which would lower blood sugar, and we have the glucagon, which would increase the blood sugar. And both hormones kind of targeting the same organs, but in opposite ways. So when we have the insulin will target the muscles, ask them take glucose and make it glycogen. Insulin will target the liver. Same thing, take a glucose and make it glycogen. If you remember, glycogen is the way we store glucose in our body. Insulin will target the fat cells, take a glucose, make it into fat. That's why people who are eating plenty of sugar will develop obesity, because all of that extra sugar will turn into fat in their system. So those are the major targets of insulin. And of course, insulin would inhibit breakdown of glycogen. Of course, because you don't want to break down glycogen because it will give you glucose. Right? So we don't want that. Glucagon will almost do the opposite thing. We'll talk to the muscles to break down glycogen and release glucose. Same thing for the liver. Break down glycogen to release glucose. And the liver also, it will ask it take fat or take lipids and turn them to glucose. It will talk to the fat cells, break down lipids and make out of it glucose. So because glucagon, as we said, it's going to increase the sugar levels in the blood. So those are the mechanisms of how does it do that. Of course, the problem would be always when we have high levels of sugar. This is coming because low activities, the nature of the food we are eating, and so on. And that's when we develop diabetes mellitus. Diabetes mellitus, it means that we have diabetes, and this diabetes is present in the urine. If you remember diabetes insipidus, in insipidus there is no sugar in urine. Here, this is the true one, mellitus. So that is when we have the sugar in the urine. We have two types, type 1 and type 1 diabetes. Actually, let's try them. For the diabetes, we have type 1 and we have type 2. Type 1 is when the pancreatic islets do not produce insulin. Okay, this is around 15% of the total diabetic people. So here there is no insulin production. Usually this is now it's believed to be autoimmune disease. For some reason those cells in the pancreatic islets, those are being attacked and being killed by the immune system. Type 1 is not so common. Usually we are talking about like 5 maybe to 10% of all diabetic patients, they will have type 1. So in this one, mostly like genetic or heredity. Okay, so usually if there's someone in the family, then very likely that those patients will develop diabetes mellitus at very young ages. Sometimes you can see we're talking about 10 years of age, people will develop, or kids will develop diabetes mellitus type 1. For type 2, this is maybe 90% of the cases. Here, there is not enough insulin production. So there is insulin production. The pancreatic islets are there and they are producing insulin, but this insulin is not enough. So what we will call it here that the cells lost their sensitivity to insulin. So what's happening is that you have the cell. Let's assume that this is a cell, okay? And this is the insulin. The stars are the glucose. This is the glucose. And on the cell surface, we have the glucose carriers or the glucose transporter. So usually when insulin comes and bind insulin receptors, okay, let's say those green are the insulin receptors, okay? And the dark green is the insulin. So when insulin binds those, this would allow the glucose to bind to its carrier and get it transported into the cells. That's how we reduce the glucose from the blood, by taking it into the cells. So that is in normal situation, normal way. But in case those cells lose their sensitivity to insulin, what's happening is that those cells, even with the presence of insulin binding to the receptors, they will not respond. They will not show plenty of the glucose transporters. So here, for example, instead of 4, maybe they will just show 1. And therefore, only limited amount of glucose being transported and the remaining glucose remains in the blood. So that's why those patients will have high sugar levels or high glucose levels in their system, because insulin or the cells are not responding to insulin anymore. Okay, the last few structures that produce hormones, we have the ovaries. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is important in development of the female reproductive system, is important in menstrual cycle, in development of the female secondary characteristics like depositing of fat, breast developments, and so on. And of course, estrogen and progesterone both are important in maintaining pregnancy. Progesterone very similar functions to the estrogen, maintaining the female reproductive system, maintaining the menstrual cycle, maintaining the pregnancy. So all of those are important functions. In males, we have the testes produce testosterone, which is also important in development of the sperm cells and development of secondary sex characteristics. Those include the muscles, the hair, the facial hair, the hair in different places, the building the muscles, and so on. Now, both hormones or both types of hormones in males and females are still under the influence of FSH and LH. Okay, although variation of which one is more important in males, but still in males we still have FSH and LH production, and that would influence the testosterone. Another hormone that is from the placenta, this is something called the human chronic gonadotropin. This is the HCG. This is the one that usually being used to detect pregnancies. Okay, so this is coming from the placenta. When the placenta is established, HCG would get secreted or it will appear in the blood. There is another hormone called the human placental lactogen. This would prepare the breast for lactation. And then there is the relaxin, which will help in child. The thymus is a gland that is important in childhood because there we will see maturation of immune cells. Okay, so this is an important gland, especially in kids, in children, to produce hormone called thymosins. And this gland will shrink as we age, so it will atrophy as we we age. Another organ that has endocrine function is the heart. The heart is secreting a very important hormone called arterial natriuretic peptide. Natriuretic, if you remember, is the sodium, or if you're familiar with the name, natrium is the sodium. So the arterial natriuretic peptide, or the AMP, is secreted in response to high blood pressure. This is the main hormone that would reduce blood pressure. Okay, the AMP is the main mechanism in our body to reduce blood pressure. We saw the aldosterone to increase it, the AMP is decrease it. We won't go into the details of it, but what will do is that will target the kidneys and ask them to shut down sodium reabsorption from there, and let the sodium go to the urine and let the water go to the urine. Okay, so it will shut down reabsorption of sodium and shut down reabsorption of water, and therefore will decrease the blood volume. Another organ that has important hormones, the kidneys. The kidneys, we saw it producing renin in the regulating the blood pressure. It will produce vitamin D3. We saw it also when we talked about the PTH. It produces erythrobiotin, which we'll see when we talk about the blood. Erythrobiotin is an important hormone that would promote red blood cells production. Okay, so erythrobiotin we will see it there. It's produced by the kidney. Then the last thing is the adipose tissue. They are producing a hormone called leptin, which will help in lipid metabolism and the storage of lipid. Also, there are some studies shows that it controls appetite as well. So that's it for the endocrine system. Please let me know if you have any questions.